A century ago, Canadian troops were known to enjoy a pint at the Rifleman pub in Epsom, England. Just what they were doing June 17, 1919, when a fight broke out and 2 soldiers were arrested.
Very large Canadian convalescent camp.
100 years later, that fateful night is being revisited on this tour, retracing the steps of those Canadians who were taken on foot to the nearby police station.
They now have 2 Canadians under arrest,
much to the anger of their comrades. The First World War had been over for months, with Canadians unable to leave just yet. Still waiting to be sent back home, some were left to heal their wounds at the nearby camp. Others spent their days in town, charming Epsom's women.
As I say, the tension between the local men and the Canadians, because of all this business of them pitching their wives and girlfriends. In fact, there were 78 women who actually left married Canadians.
Local police became unwitting targets when tensions came to a head that night in June. 400 Canadian soldiers stormed the police station, which stood at this spot 100 years ago. They busted windows, they tried to set the building on fire, all in an attempt to free their comrades. Several police officers were injured, and that plaque marks the spot where Sergeant Thomas Green was killed. Crowds lined the streets for Green's funeral procession. Headlines back home told Canadians of the violence, with 4 of their countrymen sent to jail only briefly for rioting, including Cape Breton-born Private Allan McMaster, who wielded the iron bar that killed the officer. In hindsight now, experts blame post-traumatic stress disorder for that fit of rage.
When he was faced that night, Allan McMaster was faced that night with the fight in the darkness. Where was he? Was he in a street in Epsom, or was he back in the trenches?
Years later, McMaster confessed to killing Green, but no one was ever convicted. McMaster said he'd been pardoned by Edward, Prince of Wales, who just happened to have a visit to Canada planned for 2 months later.
They couldn't even contemplate the thought of him touring those places if some Canadian soldiers were possibly going to be hung or sentenced to life in prison.
Green's family held no ill will toward Canada. In fact, his 2 daughters married Canadians, and this week his descendants traveled to Epsom to remember the slain policeman.
He would be in awe just to see that his family continued and remembered his service, that it's not forgotten.
A story seldom told in Canada, still resonating here. They're even serving special Sergeant Green bitter beer at the Rifleman pub, where the story began 100 years ago. Thomas Dagg, CBC News, Epsom, England.